I'm Jarrett Carpenter, and this is Future Signal. Andy Bryant is back, ladies and gentlemen. He is back on the show. Loves to be here. Andy, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I didn't say I'd love to be here, but I do enjoy being here. Thank you for having me.
Feels like you're being forced to be here, right?
It's part of my community service.
Exactly. I don't know what you did to get community service, but we can keep that off mic. Andy, last time we talked about AI, and one of the things that we hit upon was the fact, and this is where I told you I was going to take it in a direction. We'll see if you want to play ball. One of the things we talked about was looking at the fact that AI is starting to do what software engineers do, and it's getting exceedingly good at what they do, right? And I had a conversation today with my boss at work because I run media for a Bitcoin mining company. That may be an entire mouth of jargon I just said there. But I run a podcast, and one of the things we were talking about was all these new AI clones where I could clone myself, and then the AR avatar could just get on, we can create the backdrop, we can do whatever we want, and they're going to run it. And one of the things we were talking about was the existentialness of like media and what is going to happen. Now, media, if we just think about it from like back in the day, right, was newspapers, and then blogs started to take over that. And now most people don't get newspapers, and New York Times has a subscription, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You and I have talked off mic a lot about the fact that there's these crazy videos now with content creators that are all AI. And we've also talked off mic about this just in general, what we think is going to happen, how this is going to roll out. Should we be worried? I obviously could talk about it from my own standpoint, where I do believe that media will totally be replaced in the next 2 to 3 years, if not sooner, by AI, and it's already happening. But I wanted to, before we go to me problems, I want to deflect and talk about potential software engineer problems, because you're a software engineer, and I guess I want to ask you, you don't have to share where you work or even what you do for work, but within the industry of software engineers, do you ever just sit around the water cooler, whatever that is, I don't know what that looks like, and say, holy shit, this is like this scares me? Because I say that, once again, this is a fresh off a conversation I just had with my boss, and we were talking about the future of media and what that could look like.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a lot of work that goes into software engineering that currently is not anything near what the models and what the systems are capable of. That being said, one big thing that I always tell people is like, don't look at where the technology is, look at where the technology is going, right? Look at the trajectory. And what we thought was possible in 10 years, 18 months ago, is possible today, right? And so I see my job, as a software engineer, components of my job as a software engineer changing dramatically. I don't think that I will have the job that I have today in, even 18 months. Maybe we'll be more generous and say 3 years for a few different reasons. But I think that we will have a dramatic change in what we define as software engineering in the future. And just to give you a practical example, when ChatGPT and Claude and these other kind of like very customer centric, like forward facing, I'm not talking about some of the more like esoteric or niche engineering platforms that are focused on software engineering, but just like some of these tools that came out, we're talking about a little over 2 years ago, when those started becoming more ubiquitous with engineers, like I saw my job change dramatically even then, right? So the way that I and my colleagues were like writing code totally changed, and the way that we were reviewing code totally changed, and the way that we were even just like brainstorming and outlining these sorts of things changed, right? And so fast forward 18 months later, and that's no longer a sort of niche thing, right? With what you might think of as the folks who are kind of advanced in their, they're like trying to adopt new tools, as they come out. This is pretty ubiquitous across the industry, that the majority of engineers, I'm not quoting specific, referencing like specific statistics, but like if you talk to folks, like it's quite rare that you have folks, at the junior and mid-level that aren't in some way engaging with these tools, right? And so that's kind of like the landscape here, right? They're advancing dramatically. The reason that I just want to say that we're talking about components of software engineering is because coding is a portion of what the people do, but it's certainly not the only thing, right? There is a lot of design work that needs to happen. There's a lot of architectural diagramming. There is a lot of communicating with like different stakeholders, right? Like, hey, the business office needs to know what engineering is doing so that the marketing team, blah, 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 blah. And there's, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And so, as I mentioned, like these models, they're not there yet. They don't have agency within this world and can, act as an employee, right? Despite what, the 10 AI employee companies that were founded and funded since this conversation started 7 minutes ago would like you to believe. But yeah, I mean, along every metric outside of code generation, code review, some diagramming, some workflow optimization. Aside from those things, as far as I can tell, the tooling, the AI tooling for that just isn't there. And again, we don't want to say it's not there, it will never be there, but we also just need to, I think, as a general public, acknowledge that like when we think of software engineering, we think of a guy in a room, typing away, and like it's more than that. And I think that it's worth looking at the technology through that lens in particular.
Thank you for saying all that. That was really good context. And I was looking a little bit and I can't seem to find it. It was a comment that someone had made on social media about AI, and he is a software engineer, and he basically said he's not worried about it. And I think he works for Meta, and I'm trying to find this exact comment. I cannot seem to find it. If I find it, I will bring up the exact comment. But he was basically like, yeah, I'm not worried about this. This doesn't worry me at all, which I just feel like is in stark difference to conversations you and I've had, and just other things I've read, just like in long Twitter threads of software engineers saying like, holy shit, this is getting really real. Why is no one thinking about this? Or why isn't the alarm? And I think this is also just human nature. We don't really think about things being alarm level until they are. And a very low-hanging fruit on this, unfortunately, is just the climate crisis. That there'll be an event. Like we've had the LA fires. This was an event. There's crazy amounts of snow in Texas that they've never seen, and the Southeast. And it's like, oh, okay, maybe now we should think about this. So, yeah. And we spoke about last time, and if you haven't heard the last episode, I'm going to put that in this episode's description. But one of the things we talked about was AI Vertigo, which now lives rent-free in my head, and I've shared that clip specifically with many people. But is there going to be like an AI Vertigo moment for software engineers? Or for, and once again, I'm also letting this person's comment on social media and the thread that went back and forth kind of maybe take up too much space in my mind when I think about this. But
I don't think you're wrong. I don't think you're wrong for it to take
Is this person really long? Excuse me. Is this person really wrong? Or like what's the disconnect? Because this is the first time someone said, hey, I work for Meta and I'm not worried about my job. And I'm like, dude, you should be worried about your job.
Yeah.
Your boy Zuckerberg loves to pump stock, and the best way for him to do that is to lay people off.
Yeah. So I this is a phenomenon that I've seen in a lot of different areas of software engineering in particular, where folks are not very intimidated by, these systems that are coming online for the first time. And I have a hypothesis about this. There's some very notable people that I highly respect. I mean, we're talking like OG software engineers who have been around for decades and in the limelight for decades, right? We're talking about like Guido von Rossum, who who was like invented or created Python. Linus Torvalds, who made Linux. These sorts of folks are famously not that. This opinion might be maybe a year old at this point, so perhaps they've had more announcements recently, but there was a time at least when some of these folks were very just deliberately saying like I'm not worried about these models or these LLMs replacing me, or I don't see like a ton of the value. Like famously, I think Wouter von Rossum was on like Lex Friedman a couple of years ago, and like he was asked like, do you think that these models will replace engineers? And he's like, did Stack Overflow replace engineers, right? And so Stack Overflow, for folks who don't know, is like where a lot of folks, you would go and ask a question about a particular piece of software, you would get an answer, and then that would become a sort of like pseudo documentation for the rest of the industry to be like, oh, that's how you solve that problem. Oh, I'll go to Stack Overflow and fix it. And so my hypothesis on this, because I totally disagree with that remark, but I also have like great regard for this person. So what's the disconnect is your real question. I think that if you are an A+ software engineer and you've been doing it for however many years, and you work at Meta, or you are respected and revered in your field, or whatever, if you're an A+ software engineer, just like anything else, if you're at 98% capacity, getting to 98.5% capacity and efficiency and output is not that noticeable of a difference. And yet it is wildly difficult to do, right? Just like anything else. If you're running 20 miles, running another mile, like it's difficult to do, but like it doesn't make a huge difference to the person running that. However, getting from running 1 mile to 20 miles is like a huge victory, right? And so you see these guys who are rock stars in their industry, and they're like, but you see the person who's like straight out of undergrad, who's a junior developer, and they're going from, maybe a C+ or a B- developer immediately to a B+ developer. I mean, we're talking about maybe a letter grade improvement, where that same level of jump might be what brought Guido von Rossum up from a 98 to a 98.5% developer. We're now talking about something that is actually like career changing for a junior developer. And so I think that, this is painting with a broad brush, but I do think that might contribute to some folks' perspective on this, because they know that they're so good at what they do that when they see these developments take place, it's not as impactful for them. But again, for speaking on behalf of folks who have needed this sort of improvement and really benefit from having it, it's more than just a dictionary of Stack Overflow answers that we can kind of reference as like cheating in coding interviews, right? It's a transformative way to interact with your code and to interact with your like software engineering lifecycle in general. And I do think that it is for sure coming for just about every aspect of the software engineering workflow, slowly but surely, kind of expanding the pie out of what it's capable of. And if that person who works at Meta is confident about it, maybe that person, she will be, managing hundreds of thousands of agents coding on her behalf, but it's like, maybe she will have a job, but the idea that we're not going to be impacted by this because you're such a good engineer, I just don't buy it. And I think that the disconnect comes from a different sense of what the impact that technology is having on them.
When someone has really big confidence in themselves, I find it's one of two things. It's either because it's like Kobe Bryant, they really are that person. They are that like killer in their field. In this case, this software engineer, or they're just delusional. And that's what I normally find, right? When hubris comes out, it's like, okay, maybe you're not the best basketball player, not even in your town, never mind at your high school. So, okay, I'm glad that you took a stab at that, because part of me was also thinking that people deny things we just don't. Obviously, this is denial. We don't want to be reality. And for a lot of people, it's unbelievably, for this person maybe who has 20 years of software engineering, to then think that in 2 years they're going to become somewhat obsolete would probably be a lot to understand, to a point where you just deny maybe.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I obviously can't diagnose, or I don't mean to like judge anybody. I'll just say, like, for myself, I've definitely been in situations where confirmation bias comes in, And I say, I mean, I think we've talked about this before, but where, people think that wigs are very noticeable. And it's like every time they see a wig, they're like, oh, wow, like wigs are so noticeable. And it's like, you're not also counting the wigs that you didn't notice, right? And so I think that's also true where it's very easy to find screenshots of these programmer agents, right? These AI coding bots like really mess up. And then you're like, see, I told you. And it's like, like again, you've probably interacted with one of these things on Reddit before and didn't know it. You know what I mean? Like you're probably dealing with AI written code like as we speak, and you're not recognizing that either. You know what I mean? So you have to know how to look for it and just be a little bit humble when you come across it.
Yeah, because the grain of salt that I had in the back of my mind that got really meta, no pun intended, because this person says that they work for Meta, was that was AI. Like, what's to stop that not from being some AI bot being like, oh, we shouldn't worry about it, you know?
You know what? It could very well be, and I wouldn't be surprised if like there was just a meta joke of like we're gonna make bots who like convince humans like not to believe in bots. You know what I mean? Like that'd be pretty funny. So
If you read that, I don't know if it'd be like an Onion article or it'd be a New York Times article because they'd both be believable. I'd be like, that makes sense.
100%, yeah.
So the last episode I did, I actually recorded and I did an episode on Bitcoin and I forgot to ask you a question. I knew that you were coming on. So I've asked Sean, and we're kind of jumping ahead, but I think this question will kick off some other things probably for us to discuss when it comes to AI. Sean is a good buddy of mine, and he takes like every year, he'll take a course, I think out of MIT or Harvard, one of their virtual courses, so he gets a certificate. He did one on Python a while back. He did one on just writing code, basic intros to code. So he does this every year. It's pretty awesome. If you're listening and you're looking for something to do this year as far as like a personal development, there are classes online you can go take. And so I said, hey, Andy's coming on because he listened to the last episode. He really enjoyed it. He said, Andy's coming on. Do you have any questions? He's like, yeah, I have a question. So he wrote this long thing, and I'm like, can you be more concise? So now let me try to go through this, okay? But he's about to take this course. And so he says, AI is obviously the next big frontier in software engineering. Do you see most of the action in actually building the LLMs that will power everything or creating the applications that will leverage the LLMs? So, for example, ChatGPT 4 is the core of what powers ChatGPT, but ChatGPT is the product that everyone knows. The course I'm looking into is a CS50 Introduction to Artificial Intelligence with Python. And then he lists out the content. Do you want me to list that as well to give you an idea of what the course is?
I took that course. Yeah. I mean, I imagine they've updated it, but yeah.
Okay, you took that course. So actually there's two questions. One of them is Sean's question about, do you want to build the LLMs or build the things that are leveraged on the LLMs? And then the other question that I have is, Sean will hate me for this, should he take this course? Or is this a waste of time? Because in less than 2 years, great, he learned this information. It may not be useful.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll make an analogy. I'm very interested in evolution, specifically like evolutionary psychology. And when I like first in college, like kind of got interested in it, I had this idea in my head that like, you shouldn't actually read Darwin because like so much of it has been disproven and like you got to read the most up to date textbook and that sort of stuff. But like I've really come around on that, and I'm now saying like, listen, like reading the origin of species is like quite important in understanding not just like what the current ideas are, but like how the current ideas were formed and what has informed where we are today. And I'll use a similar analogy with programming and with artificial intelligence, that like reading some of these early papers and really engaging with this sort of content, I think it's evergreen. It's absolutely essential for more people to understand where these technologies come from. And even if you never write another line of code ever again, the next time you see code, the next time that you're interacting with someone else who's coding, you will have a better understanding, or at least just be able to engage with it a little bit more knowledgeably. So I'm not gonna do marketing for like any one particular course, or like, hey, like do what works for you. But end of the day, like I would not allow that to be, I would suggest not letting that be a turn off because, hey, they're not using the right package, they're not using the right programming language, or, oh, the content isn't proper. It's like, any opportunity to engage with stuff, I think is like edifying and fortifying, and the relationship that you'll have with this technology moving forward. I'd say that's like kind of part one. Just dive into it. And part two is like, whether or not I should be building the LLMs, or building the software that consumes them, or uses them. I mean, I think it's a good question. I think it's a little bit of a false dichotomy. I think that, you know, 30 years ago, we might have asked like, hey, should I like be building the internet, or like building the thing that uses the internet? And it's like water, it's like, I mean, imagine the same question about like Wi-Fi, right? I mean, there's a huge ecosystem that's developing, and it's really nuanced, to the point where, we're talking about, civic engagement, being absolutely upended by, some of these artificially intelligent systems, where like building the LLMs or consuming the LLMs isn't really the question. It's like, how am I engaging with the politician that's currently running for office vis-a-vis these AI-enabled technologies, right? Um, both sides of that coin of consuming or building are like a part of that, but it kind of transcends that, where it's like, how am I, voting for my representatives, or how am I, getting milk delivered to my house, and those sorts of things. If we were to say, either choose to build or to consume, I would very much say, think about what parts of the world will be impacted first and most heavily, and find ways to contribute to that, right? And if that happens to be through building an LLM for a particular charity that you're passionate about, or finding ways to build a platform that consumes those LLMs for that charity, then I'd say go for it. But end of the day, we're talking about a world before iPhones, a world before internet. Think about how ubiquitous this technology is going to be, and just imagine what the possibilities are for its impact on the world that you do already know.
Do you think we've seen humanity? It's tough to say this because when I say humanity, obviously I'm talking about. I read something the other day, like humans have been around for 300,000 years or something. We've only recorded like 6 or 7 thousand years of human history, whatever that number is, but thousands and thousands of years. But when I talk about humanity, really, I'm talking about the people who are here today on some level. But I don't know. I'm getting lost in the timeline here. But do you think that AI is will be one of the biggest inventions as far as its impact to humans' daily lives? And you could bring up any invention that you want in the past. I mean, I think electricity is pretty profound.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. We've been through these many hype cycles of different pieces of technology. Whether it was radio or television, or the internet or the iPhone, and these are all transformative pieces of technology. I mean, the invention or discovery of the principles that led to fire. Those sorts of things, right? One thing I'll say that I think is distinct with artificial intelligence, is that it's the only tool that we've ever built that can improve itself. And so we have this platform upon which we are building, like, not just a thing that's convenient or a thing that's transformative. It's a thing that we're growing, and it has the potential to be its own entity in the world, that would live beside us and work beside us, and go to the stars, and any other idea that you might have for it. And so I would have a hard time. I think that statisticians and historians and anthropologists, far more educated than I, would have a better sense of, like, what's the most impactful invention ever. And I would just say I do think that this is a great contender, because when you have this sort of iterative self-improvement combined with like agency and action potential in the physical world, you're not talking about an invention anymore. You're talking about another species. And if it's of our own creation, then like heck yeah, like this is gonna be a massive development for our species when we create something that is possibly smarter and possibly more capable than us that we have to live alongside.
What I was trying to ask you, and let me see if I can rephrase it, and that was not to ask you the question again, but to maybe reframe something is like, if you went back 200 years, you couldn't even talk about air travel because the Wright brothers did that in the last like 120, 130 years or whatever it's been. So my point is that when you think about impact, I think you always have to think about what people feel today as like an impact because things compound. So to get AI, you needed electricity. Then we needed personal computing or computing on some level. Then you needed the internet to be able to get all this data together. So you need all of these things to build up. And now look, I have ChatGPT in my phone. You need smartphone technology, you know, all these technologies. So that's where I'm kind of like, I asked myself that question the other day. I was like, is this the most impactful for humanity? And I don't know. I think electricity was probably exceedingly profound when they were like, oh, we can like light up things. And even today, not everyone in the world has electricity. So it's like, and then when, communities get electricity, it can be kind of crazy. That's where I was like trying to wrap my head around. And I'm not sure if I even explained that well.
Yeah. No, I hear you where we're talking about like a sedimentary layer of technologies, building on top of each other. And I think that's a good way to look at it. If I'm understanding kind of the nuance a little bit better, I would say, electricity is a technology that we've used to build other tools, but what impact will a tool have that can build other tools? And so, are we looking at something that will create its own version of electricity or money or education or interstellar travel or that sort of thing? That then 200 years from now, on a podcast with the remaining humans, would look back and be like, look at the tech stack that like branched off from humanity, and they have their own sedimentary layer of things that all could be considered massive new pieces of tech and inventions that humans like weren't responsible for. I think that compounding effect is going to be very apparent with the tech that is developed with AI technologies.
Yeah, this past fall, Brian Armstrong, who's the CEO of Coinbase, tweeted about how it was the first time that two AI agents, or I don't even know the proper nomenclature, but two AIs had basically exchanged value. They sent each other, I think, USDC on Base, which is their layer 2 network for Ethereum. This is Coinbase's. And he said it was the first time in history that two autonomous agents basically had done that on their own. And that started a conversation. I'm not sure if you and I have discussed this, but the idea that you just brought up, that computers, when they start to talk to one another, they may not even use English. English tends to be the de facto language that's spoken around the world, even though the UN still uses French, which blows my mind. But English is the language that is spoken. And most people have said it spread so much because it's the simplest language for people to kind of like wrap their heads around. So, it just comes to, I know, right? I don't actually agree with that. I think anyone who's trying to learn English will say that makes no sense because there's so many things that are written different than the way they're pronounced. But that is what has been said about English. It's a simpler language as opposed to some of the other major languages like Arabic or Chinese, where Chinese you need to I think have an understanding of 2,000 words, 2,000 characters just memorized before you can hop in. So with that said, have you already started to see, or do you know of any kind of like AI language that we would look at and we would need to break the code to figure out? Because basically that is what should happen as AI starts to talk to as machines start to talk to other machines. They're not going to use English. They're like, this is even dumb. We can do a different language. And like you said, they're going to create your own thing. Do you know what that looks like? Or is that already created? Is there already a name for that language? Have we already given a name to that language?
I mean, yeah, it depends on how you look at it, but you could call it embedding space or latent space in these models. So, um, people have often posited about the concept of the great embedding. Are you familiar with like embedding space or latent space? Yeah. So essentially, if you were to take a multidimensional graph of um, all of the words in the English language, that would be something that along 300 dimensions or 500 dimensions or 10,000 dimensions had a single point in space, right? So um, the word king is here, the word queen is here, and they happen to be close together in this embedding space. That's how these, the computers or the algorithms, however you want to look at it, will actually make sense of these words, right? So when people talk about tokens, in LLMs, when you are, paying X number of pennies per token, this is what, I'm speaking very generally, but this is in large part what they're talking about, where you will have an embedding space where each of these tokens has a physical location in this n-dimensional graph, right? And when I say n-dimensional, I really just mean an Excel spreadsheet, where how many columns does it have? Where it's just going to be point values. So 1, 3.8, 12.97, 300 times, 500 times, 10,000 times. And what's really fascinating, and this is kind of like the classic way that people usually communicate about embedding space, is if you were to take in these models, if you were to take the exact location of the word king, and you were able to then mathematical values, right? And you were able to then add. Oh, sorry. How does it go? I need to remember exactly. But if you were able to take the word king, I'm sorry, the word man, and you were able to add the value for king, and then subtract queen, where do you think that would get you in a physical space? Where would that get you in embedding space?
Prince.
Yeah, so sort of close. It would get you to woman, right? So when you take man, add king, subtract queen,
Got you.
you get back
Got you.
to woman,
Got you.
right? And
Got
so
you.
you're doing these jumps throughout embedding space, right? That's sort of an example that people usually refer to, and the reason that I bring it up is because we're talking about math, and this is sort of the embedding space. If we think of that as a language, right? This is just a map between English words or whatever language you're using into a language that the computer can understand, which is numbers, right? And so, one thing that people talk about is the fact that like these models will just there's so much energy that is needed to translate from English into this embedding space, machine language, whatever. Machine language is a bad term for it, but just for the sake of this conversation, um, and then translating back out, and there's loss there. All of a sudden you have a sentence that means something very specific in this space, but then you translate it out and like, oh, which dependent article is this referring to, blah blah blah, right? And so the idea is that there would be communication between models or systems that is directly in embedding space, right? Where I have a concept, it is literally a map of words with a physical location, and I'm just going to project that into your embedding space through calculations and some projection algorithm, and then that way we can just like kind of bypass what we might think of as natural language, right? Really long-winded way of saying like I think that it's anthropomorphizing what is actually happening, which again is just a mathematical model. But as these agentic systems come online, for sure that we like folks have already seen this, where there's an intent to bypass the sort of natural language output that a lot of them have to deal with, and kind of stay within this embedding space. And so the concern, and this is where the great embedding comes in, is that we would just have thousands, millions, billions of these agents interacting with each other strictly in embedding space where humans cannot decipher, what they're actually saying. Like, are they exchanging promises? Like, hey, I'll pay you Bitcoin. Like, oh, like, for sure, I'll give you some of my compute power, those sorts of things. And it is not something that we would be able to interpret, understand, or prevent any, issues that might happen. So there's definitely conversations about this. And, maybe you had a different idea of like what such a language might look like, but very much so. There's a common a common denominator among a lot of these models, and it's embedding space for sure.
That is not the answer I thought I was going to be given, but it does make sense. What you basically described was how it felt when I was like 11 or 12 and I was on AIM and I was using dial up. I was in a complete world that my parents could never understand nor get into, and they had no idea what I was up to. Not that I was doing anything nefarious at 11 or 12, but it's like that what you've described is the way the government looks at like the Tor network, right? Like, oh, we don't really know what's going on there, the dark web, you know? We can't control nor decipher because we can't see. So very fascinating. Changing gears a little bit, right before you hopped on, I saw this video of Sam Altman, and he was just like, he thinks in the next 10 to 20 years, everything that human does that's repetitive. He was first talking about white collar jobs. We kind of already touched upon that with software engineering. He said anything that's non-repetitive or anything that's repetitive will be replaced, and the things that are even if they're repetitive, but there's like emotion to it, that will take a long time. If there's like a human emotion tied to it, basically what he's getting is, I think, to like trust. He doesn't say that. And I started to think about our world that we live in today and just in our lifetimes. For you and I, and our generation, millennials, it's crazy to me to think about an elevator operator. You know, you and I are staying at a hotel and we're going up to our rooms, and it's on the 15th floor. We get in and we just push 15. We don't think about it. There was a large point of time in history when elevators came out where they had an operator literally stand there. There were different things going on in the mechanics, but for all intents and purposes, they were pushing a button. I wondered today, and this made me think, what are the things right now that are like the elevators for jobs and sectors that we don't actually need someone to do, and we can easily automate it away or just cut out the middleman and, just allow us to push the button. And I wanted to just throw all that on your plate. There's no question there. Just enjoy that.
Yeah, for sure. No, so some things come to mind, I think, in like the really short term too. We will look back on having to wait on hold to speak with a customer service representative like we were barbarians.
Like that. Like the same way you and I look at someone who would sit in the elevator and be like, sir, what floor would you like to go to? And then they'll like push 2. I see that in movies. I was watching Titanic a couple months ago and I saw it. It seems so appropriate in the context for the period. I'm like, oh yeah, this is back in like 1918 or whenever the Titanic's, like 1912. Sure, there was somebody who was, part of the staff who was doing that. But okay, you're saying for us, as we explained to someone in 30 years that we had to wait when we called for anything for 30 minutes, they would think that's crazy?
Yeah, so the equivalent would be, I don't think that I will have to explain to my son what hold music is. Because that will not be part of like comedians will not be able to reference hold music for much longer, as like a cultural touchstone, right?
It's just gonna leave the zeitgeist.
Yeah, because it's just it's like, hey, get me a refund on my flight. Like, go search. So I'll be more concrete. Suppose you needed a flight refund because it got canceled last minute, but you didn't see them give you money back in your account or whatever. It'd be like, you have access to my emails. You have access to my location data. You have access to, any sort of contacts that I would have. Go call, airline X, and, give them that information and inform them, look up their policies, find the specific spot, and just repeat that back and say like, according to this, you owe me money, and here is my credit card information, that sort of stuff. All of that will be, all you have to do is just speak that into existence. And we're not talking about science fiction anymore. This is for sure within the next 18 months. And I'm not saying that like no one will ever be on holding in 18 months. I just mean to say that like where we're headed right now is that's very possible. I mean, today we're able to book hotel reservations and restaurant reservations, for models and systems to book those things on our behalf, right? So yeah, for sure. I don't think that we'll be making any appointments at the doctor's office anymore. I don't think that we'll be doing, so many of the stuff that we all just absolutely love, fighting with different internet service providers and things like that. That will be something that we offload very quickly to these agentic systems.
Yeah, I hope that we never have to listen to hold music again. I was on hold for about 3 hours over the Christmas break trying to talk to my healthcare provider, and I got transferred 3 or 4 different times. And every time I then had to re-explain what the situation was, and it's just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So I'll be really glad if we actually don't even have to explain any of that to future generations.
Yeah.
What else? What else is going to be like low-hanging? Because now I'm sitting around, I'm looking around, I'm like, what else is the elevator attendant that we think we need, but we don't, and AI is just going to like seamlessly hop in?
Yeah. So, I mean, just expanding on the customer service thing, like the idea of like two humans having to talk to each other synchronously to coordinate something, other than like, hey, let's chat with friends. I mean, like, a real estate deal, right? Or, hey, yeah, can you come view the apartment? But it's like I can share my calendar, you can share your calendar, our agents can figure it out, and then like just send me the details, right? Those sorts of things are just not, provided that there are a sufficient number of folks in the ecosystem, right? Like the world out there who do adopt these technologies. Obviously, one guy who uses this stuff on his own, like it's not it's not going to be super useful, right? If your restaurant doesn't also, and those sorts of things. But yeah, I think human to human communication will drop off dramatically for like logistical things, that has to be synchronous. What else? And we've talked a good amount about this, but like, I think that I imagine that in the next couple of years we will see, like marketing pushes by some of the big tech companies for like AI protection, or like agent protection. And I mean like the idea like spam emails, fake phone calls, um, lawsuits, that are AI generated, and those sorts of things. I think we're quickly moving to the point where like when you think of the cost of intelligence approaching zero for some tasks, you just have to think like the speaker of those things, the person who's communicating that information where intelligence is zero, is going to 100x, 1000x, a million x. It will absolutely be necessary that the receiver of that information also employ some sort of intelligence system, because they're going to be receiving, that number of X more communications, right? So again, it's like, I think that AI generated lawsuits will very much be an issue, and you will need some sort of protection against that says, I will deal with the frivolous lawsuits on your behalf, but I will surface only those. I mean, it'll be like a spam filter. I mean, again, try and explain a spam filter to someone 40 years ago, right? And now like a spam filter, when we were off mic, like email is like, nobody uses email, right? It's like so,
I mean, some
so
people
past.
do.
Some people do, and you're looking at one of them, but that's mostly for necessity. But will we have a sort of like a legal spam filter, to hey, you're getting sued in 10 different states for things that may or may not have happened, like how do we do that? And I think the big tech companies will be able to address that. Maybe we also have some of the mid-level ones offering that as well. So that, I don't want to say, lawyers will be elevator attendants. I just mean to say that like we're going to be dealing with a huge scale up in the amount of like litigation, for example, that's going to be happening that we will have to scale out the number of agents in the world who can protect us against that as well. So yeah, legal agents, I think, is part of that. Um, what else? What else is going to be a vestige of an old time?
Well, one thing that I think, and this isn't necessarily AI, but I just think waiters and waitresses.
Why?
I just think it's gone because I don't think you need them. I think you'll sit down at a table. You and I will go out with a group of people. We'll sit down at the table and we'll scan a QR code and it will take us to an app and we're all going to put in exactly what we want. And then and then basically you're just going to have the people that work in the restaurants that are kind of the bus boys, I guess I'd call them, who'd come and bus the tables and they're just going to come bring over the food and say, yep, who had the cheeseburger and fries? Yep, who had the side salad? And you're going to be able to take that. I'm sure that there's even a refined version of this where you say, oh, what number are you seating in? And it will say, I think you're in number 3. And you're like, yeah, I'm in seat number 3. And someone comes over and they give this because I'm like, oh, I ordered the burger and fries. I'm in seat number 3. Yeah, no onions and add extra mayo or like whatever the thing is. And I've just always thought that they're kind of the role that they fulfill in a world where the pandemic sped my thinking up on this, where you went in anyway and you didn't want to talk to a human. You wanted to stay away from the human and you were using a QR code anyways, because now we're not touching physical menus because of the pandemic. It just kind of sped up. And then now seeing some of the automated McDonald's, I just kind of think that, and then also knowing how younger Gen Z and how Gen Alpha are just totally going to live in a world where they don't want to deal with humans. The idea for Gen Alpha in 20, 25 years, if they're going to buy their first home, the idea that they would have to go meet with other humans to walk through a house is going to be, for me, the elevator. So just those little touch points, the things today, like, oh, we really liked it. Oh, our waiter was so nice. It made the experience better. The food was probably pretty good. The ambient was pretty good. And the people you were with really made the experience. The waiter was just like happened to be there. I went up in the elevator. Didn't need to talk to the attendant, John, who told me about, who won the Sox game and cracked a joke.
He is a nice guy though, John.
Oh, super nice guy. I hope he's doing well now. I hope he's,
I hope he's doing well.
I hope he's got a job.
Yeah, I think the technology is there. I mean, it also doesn't require AI, right? I mean,
that's what I'm saying. It's not an AI thing. It's more just like technology. But it's one of those things where I'm starting to see tech just start to. And here's a really good example. You've actually been to this apartment where I am in Bogota. The 2 doormen who run the apartment, they switch off on days. They work 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and then they switch. So they're 24 on, 24 off. Gotten to know them both very well, know about their families. And I just got something from my landlord, and it was like, hey, the administration's going to go up. The administration is what you pay. It's basically like the
HOA.
It's the HOA, right? And I have to pay that as someone who lives there. And it goes up every year. And it's been going up more because of all the inflation. And so I was pushing back, and I'm like, wait, why is it going up so much? And they, like, my landlord, whether you're supposed to do this or not, no one else in the building is going to listen to this, so I'm not going to get, he's not going to get in trouble. But he sent me over the budget. And I'm looking at the budget, and so much of it is labor. And I didn't even think that, Joel and Jose, the guys who run the doors, I didn't even think in my wildest dreams that they would ever not be a part of this situation. But my landlord says, no, we're thinking about, automating everything by the end of the year. And then you'll see that we'll cut out all the labor. So the administration should go down. That's what he tells me. And I'm like, in my head, even though it's sitting right in front of me, and this is the things I think about all day, like what's going to get wiped away. Probably my own job, honestly, in 2 to 3 years, per the conversation I have with my boss today. But it's like these guys are probably going to get wiped away because there's a bunch of other buildings in this city and in the world where they just have a 2-door system. And I've been to them in this city. They have a 2-door system. You get here, you call up to somebody, they buzz you through the first, and then you have to wait, and then they buzz you through the second. So that way you kind of have like a nice little thing. So, everyone's so scared about thieves coming in the building and all this stuff. But that's kind of like right in front. Now, none of this probably has to do with anything AI per se, because these things already exist even, But I'm just starting to see that, there's jobs all around us that are going to just be automated away very, very quickly. And going back to the layer theory we were talking about earlier of like you're putting layers on, we have electricity, then we have personal computing, then we have the internet, and those things build up to the compound. I think adding AI on top of that automation is just going to make things move quicker as far as replacing people like maybe the doorman in my building or me as someone who's now dubbed a quote media professional.
Right, right. No, I think that you're right. One thing has been on my mind that I think is worth mentioning is that we can talk about the technology being capable of these, in this case, these sorts of things like automation. But we have to. I know I have to be careful about saying like that it will actually do this replacement or do this sort of automation, right?
Sure.
Because it just so largely depends on economic forces and humans' ability to adapt to change, and there's a lot of limiting factors that will depreciate the speed at which artificial intelligence and these intelligent systems are adopted, right? I mean, I'll quote. I won't quote him. I'll paraphrase Tyler Cowen. He's kind of having a moment in the AI circles right now because he's saying this where there's so many limiting factors in the world, like the amount of energy and how quickly corporate giants move, and whether or not the folks who like taking their kids to Little League every week are gonna say, no, I don't want our coach replaced by an AI. Those sorts of things. And so, yeah, it's a huge complex question about whether or not something is going to get adopted. But I 100% agree that it's very possible that the technology is already there to do what you're talking about. The technology is already there to replace, waiters in the capacity that you just mentioned. I think the technology is there to not have to wait on hold anymore, but it's just tough to actually, roll out and make something that's dependable. But yeah, whether or not the humans will actually accept it, I think is another question.
Yeah, and you're spot on because this already exists in many other buildings. And when I talked to Joel yesterday for about 15 minutes about this, because I just wanted to get his take. I'm like, hey, man, like we're living in a world where in 5 to 10 years, the jobs that people have may not exist. And, I gave him my own example. He said, yeah, but people in the building have to vote for it. And it's come up every year and people have shot it down,
Really?
even though they know they're going to save money. So one of the is, yes, we only move as fast as humans. Yeah, we only move at the speed in which humans are willing to basically adapt, which is exceedingly slow. Otherwise, I think everyone would already be on a Bitcoin standard personally. And then the other thing is the flip side of this. I could totally foresee a world in 20 years where most buildings in Bogota, just as the micro example, now have automation to get into your door. You basically have a fob, or it's going to be some kind of a biometric, or you're going to put in a specific code to get in when you come home. I could see people paying a premium to have doormen.
Exactly. I 100% agree that I think that part of the charm and appeal and, feeling of security are these human touch points where, maybe there are restaurants that, their whole thing is like no phones allowed. Like humans hanging out with humans. You're like, I've seen, I mean, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, you see signs on coffee shops like no laptops, like no phones, and I'm like, wow, that's like a really bold,
That's a bold move.
That's like everything that you need. Like, if someone was like shoes or cell phone, I'm like 100% cell phone, going out. But maybe the in real life experiences that these like different event spaces or restaurants or other things, like maybe they'll really lean into that specifically as a backlash to some of these kind of overarching like totally financially driven decisions to automate people out of the job.
Yeah, one of the restaurants that's in Boston, I think it's in other places, the franchise Dick's Last Resort, where you go and they basically just make fun of you and they'll put a hat on and do that. Like AI is not replacing that. But that's when I think of Sam Altman and I have my whole, I think waiters and waitresses are going to be replaced. That's the opposite, where I'm like, actually, no, I think people would eventually pay a premium to go to Dick's Last Resort, even if the food isn't good, because the interaction with the humans is at such a high level when they just make fun of you the whole time. And it's just kind of like, yeah. So anyway, I don't know how we got there. We went a little bit away from AI, but I think we were just talking about how tech
Sure,
is going to
sure.
continue to, interrupt the job market. I've already asked you the question. I've asked you Sean's question, and I know that time is of a premium. So before I leave you, and before I don't talk to you again until February here on the podcast, anything you want to leave us with? And I guess no, you know what? I do have a question. This is a spicy one. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to ask it. Today is January 17th, 2025.
I'm not doing it.
You're not doing it?
I'll do it. Just keep going, but know that I'm not
Okay.
happy about
Okay.
it.
Okay. I just want to ask, how do you think because I can speak about it for hours on Bitcoin, how do you think the Trump administration is going to impact AI?
Yeah, it's tough, man. I mean, I'm far from an expert or even, an intermediate when it comes to politics. I'll say that the policy landscape is it's very fraught with change right now, and there are a lot of bills and a lot of executive orders and a lot of things coming out of the federal government under Biden that are having a huge, huge impact on AI adoption. And, for example, in the last week, we've had an executive order and what do they call it? A budgetary action or something where they are essentially saying that we are going to allow the development of clean energies on federal land in a streamlined process for data centers. And this is huge. I mean, this is like a streamlined permitting process. There's certain tax incentives. I mean, this is absolutely massive for what we might think of as like big tech and artificial intelligence moving forward, right? And it is something that who knows if for political retribution that might get shot down, or maybe that clause where it says it has to be renewable energies, might get cut out, and then all of a sudden, like all federal lands are kind of open for development of data centers or power technologies that aren't renewable, those sorts of things, right? Um, I don't think there's any way to predict that. I mean, of course, we've seen that like a lot of folks in politics are just willing to flip flop just to hurt who they think might be their enemy. But what I will say is that I do think the next 4 years are really a crucial time in AI, and like determining what role the federal government, the state governments, the municipal governments have on the technology as it relates to their citizens. Like I can't think of a more crucial set of years for deciding what happens with this technology. And gosh, I hope and I pray that that clear heads prevail when making such decisions, and it's not backed up by political retribution or other sort of jockeying for position or anything along those lines. So I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for you. I will say that I think that it's a very tenuous moment, and again, it's fraught with change. But there's some great resources out there to follow what folks are doing in the space, and hopefully we can keep track of it.
Yeah, I'll just echo, and like I said, I could talk about this in a Bitcoin lens, but I just think we shouldn't in the United States ever politicize technology. Because if we had politicized the internet in the 90s and said, oh, Republicans are for it, therefore Democrats hate it, or Democrats are for it, therefore Republicans hate it, and if that had continued into the Bush years and then the Obama years, I think the United States would have, as a country and as an economy and as a society, would have been worse off. So I hope what we don't do is politicize technology. I just think that is not going to go well for us if we're trying to be competitive on the international stage, because there are other countries that are moving very quickly with the new technologies,
Yeah,
specifically AI and Bitcoin.
100%. And I'll just say that like I 100% agree with you that like windmills shouldn't be, wind turbines shouldn't be politicized, and Bitcoin, those sorts of things. I'll say that like the most politicized technology in the next 4 years will be computer chips. And
Yes.
and
Yes.
I pray that we don't get into a hot war over the development of these chips. But again, part of the federal action by the Biden administration over the last week was specifically geared towards ensuring that these companies invest primarily in American built technologies, right? It was so that was how the incentives actually worked out, where you could get these sort of incentives if you as a country said, we're going to buy from America, right? It was this great big buy American, push for these chips. Specific, I mean, of course this is directed at China, right? Of course this is directed at other folks developing this stuff. And so all of a sudden they're saying sphere of influence, let's get the UAE, let's get Abu Dhabi on board, and say, if you commit to buying American, then you can come over and have our chips, and anyone else, we'll see you later. So I do think that there will be a great amount of politicization just because of how valuable these are on the global stage. And I sincerely hope that we can kind of stay focused on the technology and not make it too much of a conflict when others are also looking to get it as well.
1,000%. If you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe. Listen on podcast platforms, subscribe. Follow us on social media at Future Signal Pod. Andy, once again, lovely. Hope you're well. Hope to see you soon.
Thanks, man. Yeah, great chatting with you.